Good evening and welcome to this public briefing of the Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is George Nearsu and I am the MLA for the Mackenzie Delta and acting chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. I will now ask members in the room to introduce themselves for the record, followed by those online. Starting with Ms. Morgan.
Good evening. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North. Happy to be here.
Kieran Testart, member for Range Lake. Happy to be here from Regina.
Good evening, Kate Reed, MLA for Great Slave. Thank you for joining us this evening on this very important topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Robert Hawkins, MLA for Yellowknife Center, and as always, I'm happy to be here, as well as streaming along with our millions of subscribers on our social media, as we'll enjoy this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Today we will receive a briefing from Premier Simpson on non-government organization sector support. Please note this meeting is being live streamed to the Assembly's social media channels. I would like to remind all members and witnesses to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and wait to be recognized before speaking to help us have a smooth meeting. I will now pass it over to Premier Simpson. Please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here today to present on the progress the GNWT has made on the NGO Sector Support Initiative and the next steps that are under consideration. Today, I am joined by John McDonald, the Deputy Minister of Executive and Indigenous Affairs on my left, Robert Tordiff, Assistant Deputy Minister of Government Service Integration on my far right, Catherine Robinson, Senior Advisor, NGO Relations, and Frederick Bergeron, Ministerial Special Advisor, is behind us. In response to the recommendations of the 2023 report called Strengthening the Nonprofit and Charitable Sector External Advisory Committee, and as part of the NGO Sector Support Initiative, the GNWT has committed to taking action to enhance engagement, streamline administrative processes, and improve funding stability for non-governmental organizations. GNWT-wide funding changes are under consideration to better support NGOs delivering government services while ensuring alignment with mandate priorities and departmental responsibilities. Often, NGOs deliver services that the GNWT can't deliver as effectively or efficiently, and many NGOs provide critical services based on their expertise to residents in the NWT who need them most. Moving to a model based in mutual respect and partnership will help increase alignment with our mandate, streamline processes, and ultimately deliver improved services to residents who need our collective support. Implementing the recommendations in the Strengthening the Nonprofit and Charitable Sector report requires refocusing and enhancing GNWT interdepartmental awareness and support to the NGO sector. It also requires fostering internal corporate change in attitudes, behaviors, and practices. With your permission, I would like to ask that Catherine Robinson deliver the presentation, and after that, we're happy to answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Premier Simpson. Catherine, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the Premier said, this is the presentation on the progress that we've made to date on the NGO Sector Support Initiative. I'm in charge of this. There I am. This slide just shows you the map for what we're proposing to cover this evening. So background on the project, progress we've made, and some proposed next steps for consideration. So in 2023, the Strengthening the Nonprofit and Charitable Sector External Advisory Committee report, which is a mouthful, was distributed. And the recommendations in that report, along with recommendations from the After Action Review and historical and ongoing NGO sector feedback, have all come together to form a basis for the work that we are now doing as a government. The after action review spoke about vulnerable people needing better supports. And we are working with MACA to develop emergency social services planning. And we are also considering how there is a disproportionate impact on those populations during an emergency. So of no surprise, I'm sure to anybody, there are many funding challenges that NGOs face, persistent funding inadequacy, and there is an understanding among the NGO sector that there are fiscal constraints. However, there is also a recognition that the status quo is not sustainable. So it won't come as a surprise to anyone here that NGOs remain concerned about the adequacy of funding to sustain their operations, particularly those that provide critical services on behalf of the GNWT. As I said earlier, and many NGOs understand the fiscal situation of the GNWT and are open to finding ways other than funding increases to stabilize their operations. However, there are long-term funding deficits. For example, one NGO we're aware of has received the same operational funding amount for 10 years. We need to do more analysis, and we are doing more analysis to understand the role of NGOs, their relationship with the GNWT, and our funding models. So the question of why now? So two very key risks. There is the service continuity threat, which is a very likely outcome that without sustainable funding, NGOs potentially will cease delivery of important services, critical services that the GNWT relies on them to deliver. The other is effectiveness concerns. So under the GNWT service delivery legal and operational constraints, we are not able necessarily at all times to be able to deliver services the way NGOs can, with flexibility, with expertise, and potentially with better outcomes for the residents that we serve. So those are two of the big threats. So to address those, in January of 2025, Executive and Indigenous Affairs began a new initiative to implement the recommendations from the 2023 report. I don't want to say the title every time, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. And through interdepartmental collaboration and meaningful engagement with NGOs, we are working to address the recommendations that were in that report. Indigenous governments are engaged in this work, but it is through a separate process. So the 2023 report had 3 recommendations, and you can see those on the screen. I won't bore you by reading them. However, first and foremost is implementing what is in a 2014 document, which is the GNWT Program Manager's Guide. A number of NGOs felt that if we just followed what was in that guide, things would probably improve greatly. So we have been looking at the guide, updating it obviously from 2014, and we're working through that process right now, and I'll speak in a little bit more detail later. So in order to do this work, an external advisory committee was, established by the government of the Northwest Territories to gather information from the sector. That report, 2023, came out, and the 3 recommendations that you see on the screen are now the basis for the work we're doing. So you'll see recommendation 2 suggests that the guide is updated in the next 12 months. So from 2023 to now, but the Premier has directed that we complete the update of the guide within the 2025 calendar year, pardon me. So part of the response to the 2023 report is to establish an interdepartmental ad hoc committee, It is called Strengthening the Nonprofit and Charitable Sector Implementation, or SNPSI is the acronym that we use. So SNPSI was established in April of this year with representatives from all GNWT departments, aside from the Department of Infrastructure. The group meets monthly and has made significant progress in updating the Program Manager's Guide, along with other work. SNPSI is an ad hoc committee with a 2-year mandate. It has the potential to transition to an ongoing committee to support effective partnerships with NGOs. There we go. So as I said earlier, not surprisingly, the guide needed significant updating since the last version was from 2014. We've taken a plain language approach to ensure that there is clear direction and expectations set out that support more collaborative relationships. Policy and guideline references are being updated, as well as refocusing the guide. So what we're trying to do is not just talk about the financial requirements, which are obviously very important, but we also want to set the stage for productive relationships between the GNWT and the NGO sector. The the second action that SNPSI has been involved in has been the discussion and development of a policy brief to address the use of the term vulnerable populations. So the reason we're looking at this right now is that the use of that term is increasingly being questioned due to concerns about its potential to stigmatize and reinforce negative stereotypes. This is particularly important in the NWT for our efforts in moving towards reconciliation. More inclusive language also requires government decision makers to think more rigorously about their policy decisions that avoid stigmatization and are specific to the situation that needs to be addressed. This discussion of terminology and the revised guide will be shared with departments and the sector for input. And we're taking very much a pilot project report approach with all of this, where we share the information and then work to refine it over time. SNPSI's also been working on developing a working definition of critical services to help inform GNWT-wide policy work, including emergency social services planning and business continuity planning. And again, the use of this definition will be monitored and refined as needed. Next steps for SNPSI, as I say, finalize the new guide in the fall of 2025, distribution to the sector, and establish an ongoing process for feedback to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the guide. By fall 2026, we will have developed training for GNWT staff to ensure that they understand what the guide is laying out, what's required of them, because that was one of the main issues that NGOs identified, was with the turnover of staff, those relationships and what's needed or isn't needed seem to change person by person. So we're working to get more consistency. And SNPSI also in the next year will be developing a broader NGO funding policy. So recommendation number 3 for the 2023 report spoke of other actions the GNWT could take to support the sector. And we do have other activities going on that are related. So the findings of a recent survey of the Anti-Poverty Fund and the NGO Stabilization Fund is providing valuable insight, and a What We Heard report will be shared with committee in mid-September. All GNWT departments have been directed to include NGO partners in their annual updates of business continuity plans. This will encompass those NGOs that provide critical service on behalf of the GNWT, such as Spruce Bough Supportive Housing and Salvation Army Emergency Overnight Shelters. This inclusion is intended to ensure coordinated support for those residents who are already reliant on social supports and who are more likely to be negatively impacted by disruptions and emergencies. Some of the larger NGOs have already prepared their own continuity plans, and there will be links established with those plans to ensure the right resources are in place. And recently, EIA and MACA have started working in detail on a GNWT response for developing a social support emergency planning framework that will include critical service NGOs in the planning. We've done a few other things as well. Since the initiative was announced by the Premier in January, communications have increased between the GNWT and the NGO sector overall. Work remains to be done, but there is a willingness in the sector to work with the GNWT. This spring, Finance, HR, and EIA worked together to provide access for NGOs to much of the training offered by the GNWT. And currently we have 57 accounts being established, which means we have 57 NGO employees accessing or about to access our training. Although the training is focused on the GNWT, much of what is available can be applied in the NGO sector as well. The potential to provide evergreen computers to NGOs struggling with funding for IT resources is also currently being looked at. And we did share with NGOs earlier this spring a GNWT budget timeline. So we've given them a timeline that shows our deadlines, calls for submissions, etc., so that they can understand what our cycle is. We're trying to coordinate our work with them as opposed to them coming with mid-year asks, what makes it quite challenging for us to respond. Are there any comments or questions, Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I will now ask members if they have any questions. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation and the update. My question is around, do we have an inventory? Like, do we have like big picture knowledge of how many NGOs are we providing funding to in total? How many of those NGOs are providing critical services? I'm not even quite certain whether you've defined critical services versus other kinds of services NGOs offer. Do we know how much money is going to NGOs to provide critical services right now? And do we have any idea what is the amount of the gap? Like if they're saying they're being underfunded or not able to, like, is someone trying to compile this sort of like big picture data so we know what we're dealing with here, the scale of what we're talking about? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Premier?
Thank you very much. All important questions, and of course, we need the data in order to know what we're doing so we know how to fix it. And so we do have much of that data and much of the work is continuing to gather, but I can hand it to the Deputy Minister for further information. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think when we began this initiative in January, one of the things that we first started to do is try to understand some of these issues. I think we've made some partial inroads, but certainly it's not complete as of yet. I think we've begun to understand the scale and scope of the sector. There's a wide variety of NGOs and charitable organizations out there. And in part, one of the things that we've tried to do is understand different categories and types of those organizations. Some of them are doing very different things. So we do have that information and that picture. We've been able to look at information from departments around amounts of funding annually and types of funding that's been provided. It's a little bit of a challenging picture just given the variety of different programs and services that NGOs of various types are accessing. but we do have a sense of it in terms of scale. And I guess one of the other things that's important is as we've undertaken the review of the anti-poverty and the NGO stabilization funds, we've tried to ask ourselves across departments and ask NGOs, and in some cases Indigenous governments and organizations, what they're using the funding for, whether it's working, and why they're trying to access certain programs versus others. So that's given us a bit of insight into what's going on. I'll leave it at that, but I think we're starting to get some clearer picture about how the sector is funded by the GNWT. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, follow up, Ms. Morgan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's good that the work has begun and that you are indeed trying to collect that kind of data. Can you clarify then, have you already come up with a definition of, say, critical services? That term was used several times in the presentation. So do we have a working definition? And can you explain it to us? Yeah, I'll just start there. Thank you.
Catherine? Go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, there I am. Thank you. So yes, we have what we're calling a working definition. So I think the most important point there is that this is not carved in stone. So I can read that into the record if that's helpful, and then maybe talk a little bit about what the process was. So currently our working definition of critical social services is critical services are those social service support functions delivered by the GNWT and key partners that are necessary for the safety and security and health of individuals and communities across the Northwest Territories. So we were very aware that we didn't want to step into critical infrastructure discussions or emergency planning discussions. This is around social supports. So this working definition was developed by the members of SNPC, which I said earlier are all GNWT departments. So everybody had an opportunity to participate and contribute. We have just recently pushed this definition out into the departments to say, okay, this is what we're thinking of working with. Start using it and then give us feedback on how you think things are working. So as I said in the presentation, we're hoping that a definition, potentially this one, becomes finalized, and it is one that will help us with business continuity planning, funding decisions, emergency social support planning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll just go on to Ms. Reid. One question and follow up. Ms. Reid?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation this evening. You know, in your opening remarks, Premier, you mentioned that NGOs can deliver services that GNWT can't provide as efficiently and effectively, and I appreciate those comments. And I think what I hear most from NGOs is that, you know, the reason that that is the case is that they are unable to pay wages as high as, say, a GNWT job. The wages aren't competitive. They're often losing staff to GNWT positions. Their administrative burden is growing higher, and you know, successful NGOs that are larger have people who just apply for funding. So I know you know all of this. It bears repeating for the public. And I'm glad that folks are drilling down on this and getting a handle on it. My question right now is, in the presentation, we were told about an orientation piece for staff training who work with NGOs. How will that training piece, as you see it right now, evolve over time? How are we identifying staff who require this training, and will that be managed by Human Resources? Thank you.
Premier?
Thank you. So perhaps I'll hand this off to someone who can get into more detail. I don't know if that's the Deputy Minister. Yeah, we'll go to the Deputy Minister. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the key pieces to the training is ensuring that we're driving a cultural change within the public service. As the report that Ms. Robinson mentioned outlined, there have been feelings that public servants don't provide NGOs or NGO staff with the same degree of respect that they would like to see and that they should be afforded. We want to restart the relationship, make sure that public servants understand that NGOs are playing a critical role, and as we've said already, a role that can often be done more efficiently effective than the public service. So it is about driving a culture shift. In part, it is training that would be available, certainly targeted for any staff who are delivering programs and services that NGOs would be accessing. So there would be a bit of a reverse engineering process there, going back to MLA Morgan's previous line of questioning around what programs and services there are for NGOs and what funding. This would be ideally programming that would be housed by within Department of Finance through Human Resources, and it would be programming that we would be hopefully able to design with input from NWT NGOs to make sure that we're hitting the right notes. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that detail. Following on that line of thought, as EIA and this ad hoc working group works to update the guide and starts to improve it, if there are future modifications or improvements needed, how will we be monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of the guide over time, and will EIA retain the lead for the foreseeable future? What sort of if there might be funding models that you discussed in your presentation, such as the Anti-Poverty Fund and the NGO Stabilization Fund, I guess, is EIA anticipated to hold on to these pieces for the long term and to monitor and evaluate their success? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Premier.
Thank you. And one of the primary things we're doing with this initiative is we actually now have a person who their role is about NGO relationships and ensuring that the government is building those relationships between all departments and all of the NGOs that they work with. And that is Ms. Robinson, who's here with us today. And I know that there has been already countless conversations, discussions, outreach with NGOs here in Yellowknife and actually across the territory. There's been a lot of work with the NGOs throughout the NWT, but perhaps for more information, I can see if Ms. Robinson wants to add anything. Thank you.
Yeah, proceed, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the work that we're doing with the guide, when I said earlier in the presentation that we're taking a plain language perspective, that's not just about the clarity of what will be contained in the guide. Plain language has as a principle, are you communicating the information in a way that is appropriate, that the end user can use that information? So that's very much the process that we're looking at from developing the guide. So as the Premier said, with my position, I'll be able to continue to work with NGOs. We will build in a renewal review process. I think one of the key things is going to be, how do we set up a feedback mechanism between the GNWT and NGOs that is not overly onerous on NGOs or the GNWT to make sure that we are hitting all the right points. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins, do you have a question?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity. So as someone who did work in the NGO sector for a number of years, I am very, very familiar. Ms. Reid even highlighted some of the issues. And I'd like to just, for the important value of what they are and how they represent and the challenges some NGOs face, if not all of them, I'd kind of like to just highlight a couple. I'm not going to go into detail, but Insurance has skyrocketed for NGOs, rents, wages, and even including fair wages with respect to the challenges in NGOs. And there's been calls for years about inflationary increases become automatic, built into the agreement. And there's been some challenges, in other words, some stalwart fighting against that. You'd really have to have a sympathetic ear to nudge an agreement forward. And the last piece I'd like to point out before I get to my question, Mr. Chairman, is that I've seen a number, and I'm sure every witness in this room has seen similarly, whereas NGOs end up becoming the training ground of governments. And I've seen many times people at Avens get poached because they like the difference in fair wages that you can get at the GNWT quite significantly different, in other words, more than they can. So NGO sectors for certain people, it's not for everyone, but it's also for some people love that passion work on the ground and without sort of the policy or administrative burdens. And hence there's a great relationship there. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, my question now wraps all of those comments up into this. What interrelationship are you going to have with direct input from NGOs on many of those critical issues that I've highlighted? Because frankly, they are the cornerstone of the challenges they face every day, not to mention, and that doesn't even get into their challenges of what they do. So in other words, back to costs, inflation, and if I may finish off with saying investment. And many NGOs had told me over the years, could they carry over funding? They struggle for such little funding. And yet, if they budget smartly and wisely, they don't get to carry any of it over. So there's a culture of spend your money, spend to the last cent and more that you don't have. And it makes it very difficult for an NGO to plan and create stabilization. So those are some of the issues that I see. So how do you, and certainly here, I want to stress that. So how do you see an integration of NGOs getting direct input and a positive change on those fronts? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Premier.
Thank you. And those are, exactly the types of issues that we do hear from NGOs and we do want to address. This is not, this initiative, it was not a priority of the Assembly. This is something that we wanted to bring forward because we see the value that NGOs bring, and we see our ability as a government to support organizations that can provide services beyond what we can generally provide. So that's the whole goal, is learning from the NGOs. One of the things that we're doing is that we are, it would be great if we could have automatic increases based on cost of living, but of course, every year the budget has to come through the Assembly, and so it's not always quite that easy. However, we are working with departments and encouraging them to ensure that they know who they're working with when it comes to NGOs, what those NGOs costs are, and to submit to make submissions for increases based on inflation for those NGOs. So that's something that we're actively working on. Perhaps I can go to Ms. Robinson for some more elaboration on the rest of the question. Thank you.
Yes, proceed, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you. So as the Premier says, we've been working with departments to have what we're aiming for is a coordinated ask of departments to reach out to their NGO partners and have a conversation about what the NGOs are looking for. So as I said earlier, there's an understanding in the sector that the GNWT is in a difficult fiscal situation. And I haven't encountered a single executive director saying, we need all this money and we need it now. People understand the situation. There are, however, as MLA Hawkins says, some long-term challenges. So we went to departments, they went to their NGO partners, they worked together to identify what those key priority areas were for funding. And then we've brought all that together into a coordinated document to try and address it at the government level.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up from Mr. Hawkins, and we'll go on to Mr. Testart.
Yeah, just quickly, can the Premier give us some detail with respect to the overall cost of this initiative? So what's the annual cost of this shop doing this work, and how many people are on this task force? And I believe in the presentation it was said it was intended to be a 2-year mandate. So if I could get some details, thank you.
Mr. Premier.
Thanks. I'll hand it to the Deputy Minister for that.
Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at this point, the total cost of this is one position. So I think the average is about 160,000 per position, with some O&M added to that, of course, for administrative purposes. I think where, and this leads back to the member's previous question, there are some potential future costs pending the outcome of this next business planning cycle. As has been referenced earlier, there have been attempts to capture NGO needs and to bring them forward for consideration. So those are yet to be determined. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Testart, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this topic. NGOs are near and dear to I think all of our hearts, and certainly communicate with our offices frequently about their needs. I found the comment in the presentation that the NGOs sector has we wrote down a willingness to work with the GNWT. Just to be clear, of course they do. You fund them. You and the federal government primarily fund them, so of course they're willing to work with you. That shouldn't be a sign that necessarily we've solved the relationship problem. I think the efforts you're putting into the other pieces there are, but their willingness is primarily driven by need because they've been underfunded for so long. I'm a bit confused about when they can expect new funding. I was working with supporting an NGO, and I was under the assumption that new funding criteria was coming through for this fiscal year. Apparently that was not the case. Your presentation shows the new formula will be in place 2026 in the fall, and then I presume would start kicking in the next fiscal year. So the operational budget would follow in 27. So, but then the Deputy Minister just said that NGO needs are going to factor into business planning. So can you be a bit more clear about when NGOs can expect to receive more financial support from this government? Because it either sounds like it's going to be in the last year or nearly at the end, or it's going to be imminently with the new business planning cycle. And I think clarity is really important here for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testart. Premier, go ahead.
Thank you. And so we have been working with NGOs, and a number of NGOs have received more funding. This winter we worked with the Salvation Army, a number of organizations in Yellowknife, and in response to their situations, we found money, primarily internally within departments, to support them. So that work has already happened. There's other instances where I expect that some NGOs in the very near future may be getting an increase. And then in the next business planning cycle, we hope that there will be forced growth increases. And so those are basically, what you might call inflationary increases for NGOs as well. Right now, there's a number of different government departments that fund a number of different NGOs, and there isn't an across-the-board funding formula or way that we fund NGOs. And so there's still a significant amount of work to be done, but we're not waiting for some future date to start better supporting NGOs. We're doing that now with, among other things, increased funding in certain circumstances. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Testart, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Premier for that response. That's a lot. That is clearer. So I'll turn to this critical services definition. I think it's wise to do that because, like in those examples you just given, we obviously have a lot of social problems if you walk down the streets of Yellowknife or any community, and NGOs are our frontline service providers. So it makes sense to say, regardless of whatever formula you come up with, when there's a greater need, a critical service, then you provide the funding to address that need. I completely support that. But my concern with that definition is it depends on services provided by GNWT and NGOs, which leaves out, to my mind, let's just bring up a big one, the SPCA, because the GNWT does not provide any animal welfare or veterinary services to communities. You know, that's either done through municipalities or it's done privately. So that definition would leave that organization completely out. And you know, you can talk with the SPCA and understand how important that is. They're filling a gap that exists in the vast majority of small communities. And now that we're losing vets in Yellowknife, they may be filling that gap in the capital as well. So is that definite? I know you haven't set that in stone, but I'm just going to bring that up. Are you going to consider organizations like the SPCA who provide those like critical services that government's not providing in that definition as well? Because they're an example of one of those groups that's left out of kind of the status quo approach to funding our most critical NGO supports, which have primarily been related to social services supports and housing supports. Yeah, so I guess I'm flagging that for you, that your definition may need reworking along those lines. Thank you.
Premier?
Thank you. You know, there's a number of organizations that do good work in the territory. The SPCA does great work, you know, in the Northwest Territories and across Canada. But the member is right that there likely will be organizations that don't fall under the definition of critical services, wherever it may be that we land with that. And part of the issue is that there's insufficient funds right now for NGOs that are delivering services that I think we would probably all agree are critical. You know, giving people somewhere warm in the middle of winter, giving them a meal when they have no food. Those are the types of basic critical services that we're primarily focusing on. And this ties in with the homelessness strategy. As we move towards service integration, our first focus was on homelessness. And so that is sort of informs the work that we're doing here as well a little bit. But yeah, unfortunately, we're not looking at expanding the number of NGOs that are receiving funding right now. We're looking at ensuring that the ones who are providing the most critical services have the ability to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you want to go on another round of questions. Mr. Testart, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I hear it. Sorry, just in response to that, the Premier's last statements, and then I'll move on to a question. But I do understand what you're saying, and we do need to we can't, you know, pick winners and losers. We need to make sure we have a policy rationale to these things. But like, you know, a community that's overrun by dogs that aren't being spayed and neutered, once a kid gets bitten, it becomes a bigger issue than just, you know, it becomes a critical service when it becomes a health issue or a public safety issue. So I would keep that in mind when you're developing your definition, and I'll continue to maintain, at least for that organization, the SPCA is providing a critical service. I wanted to talk about the conversation around vulnerable people. I was unaware that vulnerable people was kind of inappropriate language to use when discussing NGOs who provide services. I'm not interested in kind of the commentary on it, because these things are always changed. We used to say homeless, and in fact, many people do. And now it's, you know, the more correct or more accurate word is unhoused. So language changes all the time. But does this committee really need to do a whole bunch of policy work on vulnerable people? Can't we just understand what that means practically and move on? Like, it just seems like that's a rabbit hole that we don't need to be going on, when we just need to be focusing on supporting NGOs that are providing these services. Because whether or not you change the definition, the NGOs are still going to provide the same services. So can you give some rationales to why that's a priority for this committee when there's very other pressing work that needs to get done? Thank you.
Thank you. Premier?
Thank you. And I'll make sure everyone's aware it's not the most pressing issue that we're dealing with, but when we're engaging with the NGO sector and we hear things like that is becoming a term of concern, then we want to ensure that we're working with the NGO sector using the language that they're comfortable with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Testart, do you have a follow-up?
So can we just get clarity on the deadline or the 2026 implementation? That formula funding, I guess. What is that going to do to change how NGOs are funded, like in practical? Thank you.
Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the real shift is likely for the next fiscal year, so April 1st, 2026. We're really pursuing, as the Premier had mentioned earlier, using the corporate business planning cycle to make a case for increased funds to the sector, and as mentioned, with prioritization towards those programs offering critical services. So that really is the date where we're hoping for at least the potential of a shift in approach from a funding perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a question?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Robinson had mentioned early in the presentation that Indigenous governments are being engaged about this, but through a separate process. I wonder if you could explain what is the role of Indigenous governments in this NGO sector support initiative? I mean, sort of by definition, Indigenous governments are governments, so therefore not NGOs, but they do sort of sit outside the GNBT and sometimes provide to their members various critical social services and things. So is there a sense that Indigenous governments are somehow like competing with NGOs for this kind of funding, or that they're working with them? Or maybe you could just explain what is the role of Indigenous governments in this process of supporting NGOs? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Premier?
Thank you. So in many of the smaller communities around the territory, the Indigenous governments deliver the services that an NGO might otherwise deliver in a larger center. And even, being from Hay River, we have a lot fewer NGOs than you would have here in Yellowknife and a lot less capacity. And so you go to an even smaller community, and the only real organization in town could be that Indigenous government. And so they pick up the slack and they do a lot of that work. And so that is how they're involved, or that's their role in it, is sort of as a government, but often as a service provider as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So when you talk about a separate process of engaging them, like, is there a forum or space where like Indigenous governments might actually be interacting or sharing with other NGOs? Like, I'm assuming you have forums where various NGOs get together, or is it just that you're sort of interacting one-on-one with this NGO and then one-on-one with that NGO? Or is it that you have sort of large groups where people are all sort of sharing information or needs? Because I do think that sometimes there can be more, like, it could be really helpful and practical for NGOs to be able to work together with Indigenous governments in more cases and figure out how people could support each other or share lessons learned or share resources or partner in various things. And sometimes there's a lot of silos in that respect. And maybe there would be a use to have a space where NGOs can connect better with IGs and, have that opportunity for sharing and alliances, and not this sense of sort of like separate worlds and everyone's doing their own thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Premier?
Thank you, and I agree. We can always get more done when we all work together. We engage with Indigenous governments in a number of different ways. So we have, as a government, we have our bilateral meetings with the Indigenous governments. So that's where the Premier and Cabinet meet with the leadership of an Indigenous government. We have the NWT Council of Leaders, which is a table that all Indigenous governments can have representation at, elected representation, and the Cabinet sits at that as well. And then there's the Council of Leaders Secretariat, which is the officials level body where a lot of the work really happens and a lot of that consultation happens. I think there's we're always wary of how much we engage with Indigenous governments because we ask a lot of Indigenous governments, and there's a preference to use the existing forums instead of asking them to engage in yet another forum. But that being said, I do agree that there's a lot of opportunity for best practices and information sharing and things like that. And I'm not sure if so the Deputy Minister would like to add something.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the Premier really outlined some of the dynamics in terms of existing tables where we work on a bilateral or multilateral relationship with Indigenous governments and organizations. One of the reasons for why we tend to work in that manner is just out of respect. We have self-governing treaty partners. There's a duty to maintain that relationship, and one of our big enterprises as a government is to try to modernize that relationship and make it more equal and respectful. So there's a certain mode in which we work with our treaty partners. The Premier mentioned the fact that NGOs and Indigenous governments or organizations are alike in that they sometimes play a program delivery role. And so one of the things that some of GNWT programs ask of applicants is, can you demonstrate where you're working in partnership with other organizations within your community, within your region? So an example of that would be the Anti-Poverty Fund, which is now an EIA program. So that type of process is seeking to find out if there are ways where organizations can collaborate together and have better benefits for shared clients. So there are a few ways in which we're trying to get at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this dovetails really nicely. Mr. McDonald just mentioned the Anti-Poverty Fund. I went back and I saw the recent release about the distribution of the Anti-Poverty Fund and the NGO Stabilization Fund for this fiscal year. I think it was announced in August. So the Anti-Poverty Fund totals 1.75 million, and the NGO Stability Fund, I added them up quickly, and it's about $700,000. So for a total of 2.45 million. That's, it's not nothing, but it's also not very substantial in the grand scheme of things. I recognize very, very acutely what sort of financial situation the government finds itself in right now, and how it's trying to be prudent for the future. I appreciate all of that. I suppose my question is, knowing that the Anti-Poverty Fund and NGO Stabilization Fund are sort of there as a bit of a gap filler in a lot of ways, outside of core funding and project funding. What sort of totality of an inventory is being done by the working group to understand how much money is going out the door and how much money is still going to be needed, moving forward with the policy that is in development for release in 2026? Will committee be updated on this work and sort of an inventory of what currently exists? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Premier?
Yep, thank you. So we recently went out and we interviewed and surveyed NGOs on those two funds, the Anti-Poverty Fund and the NGO Support Fund. And so that report will be coming out soon. And so we'll be able to see, the responses from the public, from the NGOs on how they feel that program is working. One thing we noticed is that, well, first of all, I'll say that yes, there's about 2.5, let's say, $1 million there. That's a part of the funding that goes out to NGOs. That's not the totality of it. That is just for these specific funds. And one thing we saw with the Anti-Poverty Fund is that there's often applications to the Anti-Poverty Fund that are in parallel to other NGO funding pots that other GNWT departments have. And so we need to consider, is this the best model? Are there other ways to support these NGOs? Why are they, if there's already this fund, why are they coming for this other fund? And so that type of work is happening right now, and we're really digging into it. I'm not sure who wants to add a bit more. I can go to the Deputy Minister for some more information on this. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe just to build on what the Premier had said, the What We Heard report, which will of course be made public shortly, has really given us some insights and some confirmation of things that we had heard or anticipated. But in some cases, it told us some things that we probably didn't think were the case. So generally, I think what it's given us is some insights into what's working or what hasn't been working as good as possible about these two programs. We do, as the Premier mentioned, see a pattern where NGOs are often applying to a number of different GNWT programs in an attempt to cobble together sufficient funding to operate, which presents a challenge for NGOs, as you can imagine, because of the administrative burden, multiple applications, different departments, different reporting. And that's actually an administrative burden for GNWT public servants who are trying to deliver programs and help residents in various ways. So we're looking at this as a first foray into having conversations with other departments about why is our system evolved to be so fragmented. And that brings us right back around to that definition of critical services. And perhaps there are some portions of the sector that we need to look at funding in a more homogeneous way in order to make sure that they're stable, to incent them to get back into some of the key business that the GNWT can't do as well. And of course, to reduce administrative burden for all concerned. So there is a relationship between all of this work as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My very first job in the public service was as a summer student in health promotion, and I processed health promotion fund applications, and it was for pittance, really, but it's how all of these funds and all of these pockets and all of these various places in the GNWT add up and sustain organizations, right? So it's a long-standing problem. I'm very pleased that EIA is working at addressing it in hopefully a meaningful way. I guess what I would say though is, can we please have a commitment to understand a bit better the dollars and cents that are currently existing for the NGOs that are participating in this process, such that it could be understood better what the cost pressures really are looking like for NGOs, confidentially to committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Premier?
Yeah, I'm happy to share whatever we can put together confidentially for committee. I'll say though that it won't necessarily provide a complete picture of the cost pressure that an NGO may be facing. There might be an NGO who is getting by on what they're being provided, just barely getting by, but we might not know what they actually need to really to thrive and serve a greater population and do more of that good work. So we can provide the numbers that we do have, but what's actually needed out there is a much larger discussion that I won't be able to provide an answer on that number to the member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does any other members have any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today. This concludes today's public briefing on non-government organization sector support. Public briefing is now concluded. Thank you.